well for issues that are up, but it also will accelerate and accentuate the joyful, graceful periods as well. So see it, feel it, live it, be it, transcend it in place. Transcend it in place, that's the difference. It's still there, but the effect is different. And speak it all along the way at appropriate moments. So that's a kind of an abbreviated introduction to six-step recognition yoga. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, when Linda brought it to my attention, it was, to me, extraordinary because I've done many years of study in the Oriental traditions, and I'm not a scholar, but I know a good deal about various yogas and practices and so forth. And Linda doesn't have that particular background, but I instantly recognize that this is a version of what in yoga practice is called, people pronounce it differently, samyama or samyama. It's in the ancient classic text, what is it, the Yoga Sutras.
Yoga Sutras.
And this is one of the definitive texts of yoga. And this practice, which I pronounce samyama, is in some ways the ultimate practice. It's to contemplate or meditate upon something so profoundly that you, this is a place where you can use this word as a verb, you divine its essence. In other words, you know it from the inside out, like the hand in the glove. And when Linda explained this, incredibly simple, I mean, we've got one two-syllable word in the whole list. It's the simplest possible language, and yet it's actually not only very profound, but also quite a departure, again, from the traditional ways that, and many contemporary ways, that we're taught to engage with what's coming up, especially the difficult material, in order to get to transcending. And oftentimes, the whole idea of speaking it, as people were saying earlier today, doesn't come into the picture. I think Jude was saying, and Kathy, I've been working on this stuff in myself. The assumption is that ought to be sufficient. And that was what I suggested. Well, let's add that mutuality piece in here, because we already knew that it could magically, apparently, accelerate, as Liz was saying earlier. So, typically, if you're even willing to see things in yourself, actions, reactions, patterns, whatever, that are, and let's focus on the difficult ones for the moment, that are difficult, you're often not encouraged to feel it. I think Tessa was giving voice to that. You're encouraged to do something about it, to fix it, to get distance from it, to be able to set it aside, let it go, it's just your story, whatever. And where people are encouraged to feel it, however, it's typically only to a degree that they can be aware of it and have a certain kind of clarity about what it is. But then, at point number 3, step number 3 here, that's where we really jump off into the taboo land. If you're a spiritual practitioner or a psychologically and emotionally self-working, self-transforming person, you certainly shouldn't act it out. I mean, there are some schools that will allow that, but typically they're not oriented toward including that transcendental dimension of being. So they're more psychologically about getting into it, but they don't include that greater dimension of who we are.
Or they'll encourage getting into it, like processes, psychotherapy processes of beating pillows, you know.
Catharsis.
Pardon me?
Catharsis.
Catharsis,
yes.
yes.
Catharsis, exactly. Yeah. That is a practice, it's a discipline. If you're just doing it because you're supposed to be doing it, it's not that real drive in your being, like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. Not to say that that isn't an effective practice, by the way. It is very effective for individuals at certain parts of their process. But this was revealed as I could not help but live it and express it and animate it. And so I was driven to find ways to bring it into life, bring it into action so that it wasn't getting stuck in my body. I was actually making myself ill from holding it and deflecting from it for so long until I was ready to not deflect.
In other words, rather than holding it graciously and spaciously, holding back with it,
Yes,
being held back in it,
Yes.
which gets very toxic, as I think most bodies know. So what happens then is you go directly into becoming it. And this is, people were talking about trust earlier. This is a great leap of trust, to begin to give yourself permission to go into the very qualities that have previously been the enemy. You know, if you're angry and acting out, well, you're not practicing. You're not doing your yoga. You're not living your spiritual life. Typically. And our orientation is not quite that way anymore. We're not simply talking about, obviously, becoming a self-indulgent, unconscious person again. We're talking about going beyond what we've previously understood was appropriate into more of an inclusion of what it is to be a real human being. And that inclusiveness liberates energy, attention, awareness for you to then become that much more confident in realizing and being who you are and participating with strength and power and freedom and sensitivity and humility in the world. So what then happens is, again, this transcending in place, and we hear this from people a lot. They'll get to a place in their process where they find that they're right in some of their most difficult stuff, and yet, at the same time, they're feeling somehow this freedom, this fundamental freedom, fundamental wellness or okayness. And it's often quite confusing. But then the speaking it at various moments when it's appropriate and where tends to quicken and streamline the process further. So it's actually very profound. And as Linda was indicating, part of what I recognize about the 6-step recognition yoga is that it becomes natural to you. So Linda's going to lead us through an exercise, a guided meditation with this in just a minute. We'll have some time to talk about it together. But in short order, fairly soon in your work, in this kind of way of being and becoming, you'll notice that you're going through this before you even think about it. It's just bang, happening. You're not looking for it. There you are, you're in it, like Linda was saying, just driven, and you go through the sequence without a fundamental necessity to push something painful about yourself away. Make sense?